Hi, everybody. David Nour on behalf of Service Council. It's good to be back with you for another inService podcast. This one is live with the Service Council CEO, John Carroll. Hello, John.
Hey, Nour. How you doing?
Good. It's good to see you. We're also joined by James Mylett of Schneider Electric. Hello, James.
Hey, David. Good to be here.
Good to have you. So for our audience, if you haven't had a chance to listen, James and I had a great conversation in the podcast this morning where we talked about redefining experiences and responsiveness and the evolutionary role of field service. But James, let's start with those that may not know as much about you. Could you kindly talk about a little about your background, where you've been and what you've done?
Yeah, sure. The reason I'm smiling for the audience is David was teasing me on the podcast, and yet again, right before we started, about riding a Harley, and I was reflecting mentally of a story that my dad shared with me. When I got my first Harley, he was so proud because he was a police officer in New York, and he was sharing with me a conversation between two of the motorcycle cops, one of which rode a BMW and was explaining that the BMW was the Cadillac of motorcycles. And the other one, that was the response. The other one rode a Harley, and his appropriate response was, "I understand that, but Harley is the king of the road."
Nice.
So there you go. So that's why I was smiling. So yeah, just a little bit of background on me. I've been in the services industry for 40 years now. It's been an unbelievable journey for me. I continue to learn every day. I'm fortunate to work today for Schneider Electric, an organization that continues to stretch me personally and has taken me into the technology space in a way that I never imagined. And I think especially given the environment that we're all leading through right now, whatever development was going to happen with me accelerated as we went through the pandemic. And my eyes have really opened to the impact technology is having on all of us, and then the unmet potential that is still out in front of us. So our focus as an organization is helping companies with their sustainability roadmaps become more efficient, help their buildings become more resilient. A lot of focus on sustainability. And then the other piece that has really emerged here lately is this notion of people centricity. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that. I was born in Brooklyn, grew up in New York, out in Long Island, came to Texas right out of high school, and started my career as a refrigeration technician with MD Anderson Cancer Center. And have held a number of different positions in between these bookends, including a 14-year career at Johnson Controls and 3.5 years at Comfort Systems USA, where I was an officer of the company. So,
how would you, for those that may not know as much about Schneider Electric, how would you define the culture?
Oh, great question. Yeah, it's everything that I hoped it would be when I joined here is probably the best way to put it. I was fortunate in the year before I joined Schneider, the board at Comfort Systems had asked me to put together the strategy for the organization. And I had a friend here at Schneider, Kevin Self, who led strategy for North America. So I asked Kevin to kind of give me an extra set of eyes on the work I was doing. And what came with that was some insight into the culture here at Schneider. So I would say that inclusive is probably the word that jumps to mind for me, because when I think about culture, I look for differentiation points with the industry and with the workplace in general. And this is the most inclusive organization I've ever been a part of. And it's something we work very hard at and we continue to improve at. I would also say when I say it's a global company, this is the most global organization I've been a part of in terms of the way we actually act. Right? So we're global, we're also multi-local, so we continue to make decisions close to customers, but the connectivity between the organization globally is unbelievable, and it makes us better.
So John Carroll, I got to ask, how did you meet James, and what made you want to invite him to join the Service Council Advisory Board?
You know, it was a tough path because friends also don't let friends be Yankees fans.
Yeah,
that's another thing. So, James, quick side note, my father was a firefighter in Greater Boston for almost 40 years and had a 1979 Police Edition Harley. It was fantastic.
Road King, yeah.
But I've known James, for a decade plus now. James has served in a board capacity for the Service Council, dating back to Johnson Controls, and all the way through his transition to now here at Schneider Electric. So his contributions to our organization have been completely over the top and very meaningful. Our audience enjoys having the opportunity to learn from James.
That's fantastic. So, James, in our conversation, and by the way, you lead U.S. digital buildings. And one of the questions I asked you on the podcast was, I'm not sure I know the difference between a regular building and a digital building. Talk a little about digital buildings and I really appreciated your comments around energy efficiency and really lighting up these buildings to be much more sustainable, much more part of our lives as we kind of talk about moving forward into hybrid work.
Yeah. So just some context on the space. So 50% of the building stock in the US was built before 1980. So when you think about the technology that our children have grown up with in their hands, the buildings of yesterday weren't built to meet today's challenges.
A lot like Harleys for modern day motorcycle riding.
They don't leak oil anymore. So a lot of our work is in the built space, helping owners and occupiers bring these buildings into the future so that the experiences that people have with the buildings looks and feels a lot more like what they're used to in their consumer life. We know that the people entering buildings today are more likely to be digitally native than ever before, and that'll be exponentially so in 5 years. And the experience that the digitally native population grew up with is very different than the experiences that were in place when these buildings were built back before I gave up my last leisure suit and was listening to disco. So,
let's talk about John. I'm really curious about in the last advisory board meeting, you presented some. I got to tell you, it took me by surprise. One of them, which was this voice of the field technician research you guys have done, and I'm looking at the data. Would you recommend your company as a great place to work? 33% of those frontline agents, the field service engineers, 33% disagreed or strongly disagreed.
Yeah.
Talk about that, and why do you believe that's the case?
It's an interesting trend, and it continues. So the data you're referencing was actually from the 2020 Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey, and then building this year, we've done this for the last 5 years, surveyed that same audience. It continues. The trend continues, where 60% of the demographic ages 25 to 44 are planning to defect the role of being a technician, and it's because of reasons of dissentiment. There is some career steps in there, right? Some of which are leaving that role because of career ladders or career lattice, if you will, adjacencies. But there's a notion of dissentiment, and a big part of the dissentiment is because their job is not easy. They're isolated in many cases, and they don't feel like they're being heard from management. So 60% of our audience, which was 725 technicians, indicated that they don't feel like their input into design, strategy, innovation is actually applied to their business. And so one of the trends that we've been talking about is this whole notion of how customer satisfaction has evolved to customer NPS and now customer effort. How difficult is it for a customer to seek and receive support? Well, the same thing should happen on the employee side. So responsiveness should flip on its head and go internal to think about how can you make their job easier.
So, James, on that note, you got dissent. You also have this silver tsunami that's happening of the older technicians, more seasoned technicians are retiring. We don't have it seems like we don't have as strong of a backfill of the apprentice program and bringing, kind of the younger technicians, those that are in the spring of their careers. How are you dealing with this at Schneider? What are you guys doing in digital buildings to kind of make sure that they're not only engaged, but we backfill that talent pool?
Yeah, you asked me on the podcast about some of the goals that we have as an organization, right? And I mentioned that, at the end of the day, our job is to deliver sustainable, profitable growth, right? And then you go down the funnel with that and you start looking at net satisfaction scores with customers, right? Gross margin levels on projects. And you go down the funnel again. If you're in the service business, the stuff that is downstream from that frontline provider doesn't happen if the engagement levels aren't up. There's been all kinds of research on the correlation between safety and employee engagement, the correlation between customer satisfaction and employee engagement. And you can't get world-class customer satisfaction scores if your frontline employee engagement scores are in the 30s. You can't get there. So to directly answer your question, the first step in any problem is recognizing you have a problem and doing something about it. So we spend a lot of time, I call them listening posts, establishing listening posts with our frontline. So I'll give you a very real example. When we first started to go through the pandemic and we realized what we were up against, we immediately set up a group of frontline technicians that became my personal listening posts. So I would reach out to that group every now and again just to check in and see how things are going for them on the front line. Just recognizing for me that the safety situations that they were having to deal with, this time last year were very different than the situations they were dealing with a year prior to that. So I wanted to understand whether or not our messaging around making the right decisions and the PPE was actually getting there. And the fact that the leadership team was reaching out for their opinion, John, to your point, inclusivity, my opinions count. We were making sure that the experience that we created with our frontline matched the words that were coming out of our mouth. And that's a big thing for us, the say-do ratio.
Again, John, on the last advisory board meeting, I love it. You had this fabulous agenda of let's talk about digital transformation and employee engagement and service revenue, and talent just dominated. Were you surprised by that? And there was a very diverse group of executives that were in that conversation.
No, I wasn't surprised. I think people is an important challenge right now. It is counter to what we're finding in our research, right? So when we survey service leaders, we had an adjacent research project that we once again do annually amongst service leaders, and it's called the Service Leaders Agenda. It's always CX initiatives, cost, and then revenue. Revenue is always tertiary. This year, however, the top metric in mind for service leaders is service revenue. So I thought service revenue would be an important angle inside the discussion, but we didn't want to leave that topic, so we stayed on it, and I think it's a really important one.
Let's stay on that topic for a second, James. Yep. What do you believe? One of the topics that came up was let's go earlier in these kids' perception of field service and recruit from high schools, if not earlier, to kind of come in this apprentice program. And do you have a dissenting view of that, or what do you believe is the answer in making field service less of that greasy, dirty job that maybe our parents did, and much more the digital role that it is today?
Yeah, no, it's the job that I did, right? So I recognize it. I think the thing I appreciated about the job I did that carried over into my leadership style is I found a way to connect the dots between what I was doing and something that was meaningful. So like even when I was at MD Anderson Hospital, one of the assignments we had was to be there front and center in the surgery rooms, so that if something did go wrong from a temperature or humidity standpoint, we were there to correct it so that surgeon could be at his absolute best, right? So for me, even at 19 years old, connecting the dots was important. So we spend time on that with our folks. And some of the work that you've done with our team on this HERO program is really meant to help people pause for a minute and take inventory of the purpose that's in their work. We have a client, Penn Medicine, that built this pavilion, and they refer to it as a beacon of hope. And we've been their technology partner from the beginning, but a beacon of hope as opposed to a 17-story building, right? So if you're in the trades and you're talking to somebody about getting into construction to go build a building, that's a conversation. If you're talking to a prospective entrant into this industry about being part of a technology team to go help a customer build out a completely differentiated patient experience, right? And a completely differentiated experience for the healthcare workers and the surgeons, that's going to result in this dramatic outcome that creates this beacon of hope. Wouldn't you want to be a part of that, right? So I think part of our challenge is to connect those dots. But again, specific to your question, I do have a bit of a dissenting view. I don't disagree that we should spend time upstream. So in the middle schools, in the high schools, having at least an equal voice in the conversations that are propelling people to go to four-year universities and rack up large student loan debt. It's just a matter of equity in the voice. I think we need to work at that. I also don't think that that's the solution to the problem. I think we have to get clear on what the problem is that we're trying to solve for and have solutions that are specifically pointed at that root cause. And I don't believe that the root cause is solely rooted in there not being enough people. I think there's plenty of people out there in the space that are entering into the workplace. I think our challenge is to make sure that the work that we're putting them in front of brings meaning to them. And I think we're fortunate with Schneider to where we have a basket full of work that fulfills that promise.
So I couldn't agree more with between on the connecting the dots. I think people need to see the bigger purpose, bigger kind of end result of why I'm doing this and how my efforts make a difference. And I agree with you that hero, which I think we were the spark. You guys made it a flame and a fire, and it took off. But what a fabulous opportunity to recognize those field service technicians, those designers that, let's be honest, may go unappreciated on a daily basis, but that the work that they're doing absolutely makes a difference. So you brought up redefining that experience, redefining expectations, redefining how we serve. Talk about that for a second, because the other fascinating thing was you and I as consumers, right? And the example I always like to use is, on my watch, I can figure out when my pizza is going in the oven, when it's on its way to delivery, and right on my pizza. Why, as a consumer, why can't I get that same experience from my B2B relationship? So talk about redefining that service experience.
Yeah, your expectation has been reset by that experience that you just described, right? So what used to be an accepted level of service has now moved up. The bar has moved up on what's accepted now, and anything below that is unacceptable or criminal, right? To use some of the models we're familiar with, right? So our challenge is to continue to move that bar up. You talk a lot about reinventing and redefining the work itself. And when I talk about problem solving for this labor issue, I think part of our issue is we don't finish the sentence. I don't think that we have a labor issue. I think we have a labor capacity issue, right? And that capacity issue can be solved two different ways. The solutions can come in two flavors. One flavor is more bodies, and that's the default for all of us. The other flavor is reinventing the work to create more capacity in the bodies that you have and the ones that you're bringing in. And I think if you think about the way that work has already been redefined, something as simple as oil changes on your car, right? So back in the day, right, when these buildings were being built in the 1980s, the recommendation was every 3,000 miles you have to change your oil. Well, it's been reinvented. The oil's been reinvented. It's synthetic now, and it's 10,000 miles. You think about the capacity that's been removed, just something as simple as that. So those friction points in the design is critical, and part of our focus right now is eliminating the mundane. So we're going into the work, we're transforming the work that we're asking our frontline workers to perform with a strong focus on eliminating and automating the mundane. And that'll lift the employee engagement scores, because when they're out in front of a customer, they get to do what they love to do.
John, didn't we talk about this, that one of the biggest things field technicians hate is the paperwork and all the minutia that they have to do versus what they really want to do, which is, I want to serve customers, I want to solve problems, I want to take care of them, not be enthralled in all that the mundane that James just talked about.
You're absolutely right. Time finding information, paperwork, and admin, those are all the things that are least likable about the job. So how can we automate and create an easier pathway for them to either eliminate it or improve upon it, right? I want to make a quick comment too on that pride in the role of being a technician or an engineer. Yep. I was driving on the highway and I noticed Caterpillar is now branding their truck service. I don't know if you've seen this, but they are like right out there, front and center, draped across their entire fleet of trucks is the word service. I just love that example of an organization who's just taking that pride in service and making it right front and center in terms of what they're doing day in and day out in the field. So I think that's an important part. Is you talked about not only saying but doing, James. That was an example of the doing part that I thought was really important.
It's we've got a great question from Sharon Kroc. By the way, Sharon, I don't want to flex on Sharon, but she's got the wisdom that she just bought 25 copies of the Curve Benders book. I don't want to make anybody else feel bad in this session, But let's go to Sharon's question. How do you stay connected to the front lines in such an enormous organization, especially in addition to your other duties? Do you ensure different levels of management are also staying connected? James, let me come to you first. And then John, if you could think about the question as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think tone from the top is critical, right? So the managers that are closest to the front line are the key to this whole engagement equation. And they need to know that we're equally committed to creating these experiences. So how do we stay connected? We create listening posts. So that group that I talked about earlier is a very good example. We do a lot of recognition here. So once a month, I get a report back from our customer sat team on anybody in my organization that received a 9 or a 10. And then we have a specific recognition portal that we set up that's lined out to our core values. So we have a core value that says customer first. So I'm able to recognize somebody that created an exceptional experience for a customer, quote the customer, and then tie it back to our core value around customer first. And it just reinforces who we want to be as we go forward. And it gives me an opportunity to stay connected. The other thing that I've started again this year is just reaching out. Something as simple as reaching out to people on their birthdays. And if nothing else, just to let them know that I see you and I know you're there. And it makes a difference.
One of the coolest, I want to build on that before I go to John. One of the coolest programs that I saw in an industrial materials, industrial automation company was this idea of ride-alongs, where the leadership team actually went out with field sales and service and people that touch those customers on a regular basis. Anything of that in your world or your team by any chance?
So for me, actually, Karen Hamill, who just joined us a year ago as our VP of service, that was one of the first things she did. She got out and rode along with the technicians just to get grounded on what their world is really like. When I was at Comfort Systems, I ordered a uniform. It was a dangerous day. I ordered the uniform and went out with one of the mechanical techs. And the interesting thing was we were trying to troubleshoot a package unit, and we got stuck. And I used to teach that stuff at the community college, and I was just not one to open my mouth to expose how much I had forgotten, but dove in, and it was like riding a bike. It came back. It was a good day for me, and it was a great day for the tech. But I always walk away with these nuggets that change the way we look at things. Real quick story. We did a meeting like this with two of our frontline leaders a couple of months ago, and another way of us staying connected. And what came out of that was we realized that our organizational design was not putting them in a position to be their best in front of their technicians. And from that listening post exchange, we've rolled out a new organizational design.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's impactful.
So John, let me ask you, how are you finding other service leaders within the service council community to really stay in touch, stay connected? I talk about getting and keeping your finger on the pulse of what's really happening at the edge of the business without it getting filtered by the organizational hierarchy. How are you hearing other service leaders do that?
So I think, James, first of all, if you could video record the next time you're out in field, that would be wonderful. We'll put that out to the community. I think James is his comment on listening and creating listening posts and being involved in the ride-alongs is so important. It creates a sense of belonging. It creates that listenership from management to down to the front line. The other thing that we're hearing as a thread amongst service leaders is the notion of creating peer-to-peer interaction, right? It's one thing where management can sympathize with the frontline agents and be involved in that listening opportunity. It's another thing where peers can empathize with one another in an environment that creates that opportunity for feedback and listening. So we've heard a lot about peer-to-peer interaction, peer-to-peer groups. I think that's another supplemental point behind James.
We've got a great comment by Chris Collins. I believe one of your peers right now is a peer, right? Customers come back to a company because of the experience with the front line, not because of the management. Management's role needs to be enabling that frontline hero to solve the customer problems. So I want to recognize Chris recently got promoted to country manager of Ireland.
Yeah. President
of the country. That's right. So talk about, James, how you prioritize developing your talent. Chris, very sharp in our work together around that transformation initiative that he was leading. Talk about developing Karen and Chris's on your team.
No, I'm fortunate in that I get to lead a team of peers, and I really believe that. It's folks that stretch me regularly. I learn from them all the time, and then part of my role is to pay it forward. But I really see my role in this point in time in this organization as being a bridge to the future for us. And because I look around me and I see unbelievable talent that's ready to step into these roles. So part of what I do is preparation, exposure, and making sure that when the opportunity is there, folks like Karen and Chris are ready to step in. And there's a huge bench behind them of talent as well. But what enables that is growth. I mean, back to my point about our job. Our job is profitable and sustainable growth. And by continuing to grow the business, we create opportunities for people to grow their careers.
Talking about a bridge to the future, John, I know a big part of Service Council's research is really on the impact of technology in the evolution of the field service, customer experience journey. Talk about that a second. What technologies are you seeing? What technologies are really creating a difference? And beyond the hype, what's real? What is making a real difference out in the field in terms of driving revenue, driving growth, driving that operational efficiency?
Well, to your point, right, customers are changing the way in which they interact with service providers, right? Their channel of preference is changing. They're driving more immediacy of response and in many cases predictive environments where issues are avoided. So that's driving them towards self-service portals. That's driving them towards knowledge and information portals that will help them self-serve, self-soothe. And so that's changing the way in which the service experience is starting and ending in many cases, or beginning in other cases, where a dispatch is then behind that when triage and diagnosis requires it. We're hearing a lot about upskilling. So, with the knowledge that's leaving the marketplace in terms of that aging workforce retiring, we're hearing a lot about how can we upskill our labor with technologies like augmented reality, mixed and merged reality, virtual reality. We're hearing a lot about artificial intelligence in predicting service outcomes and predicting scenarios by which the technician can resolve issues in the field. So not only, that see what you see methodology with augmented reality, but also that here's what you might want to try as a result of what we're seeing. And so I think those technologies are going to be here to stay. And I think they're going to extend not only beyond the technician's needs, but they're going to go right down to the customer need. And so you're going to see a lot more see what you see type methodologies being enabled at the customer level.
James, talk about that. How do you and your team evaluate technology? How do you roll it out? And what are a few that you're really proud of in the evolution of your service organization?
Yeah, I think these transformations go through three phases, and for us individually, right? So when we look at the first phase, it's viewed as something that's crazy. And then at some point it becomes dangerous. And then ultimately it's just obvious that we do it, right? So we go from crazy to dangerous to obvious. So when I look at some of the transformations that we've made, just pre-pandemic, we made a big investment in shifting our learning to digital first. And the initial response from our team was, that is insane. You can never create the same experience that you can get face-to-face. And I chose not to argue with that because I'm not sure I'd ever win that argument. But in the absence of face-to-face, what's left? What do people default to? And the answer is nothing. So at a start, let's just go with filling that void between nothing and what is viewed as best in class. And we've got, I think last count, we had over 68,000 digital interactions with our learning for last year, right? It was going from where we started in a very short period of time. Another example of the pandemic accelerating, technology adoption, but the pain of staying the same because I can't get to a class, I can't be face-to-face, got greater than the pain of adopting this digital platform. And once we got in it, people loved it. And I'm not sure we'll ever go back to the levels that we had before. There'll always be a place, I believe, for some level of face-to-face interaction, but this digital learning will definitely fill the gap, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of. One point back to your question about development that I wanted to touch on before we move further away from that. One thing that we spend a lot of time on is focus feedback. And it's something I'm very passionate about. And I think as leaders, it's a place where all of us can continue to improve. I had a leader tell me a long time ago that the reason that managers don't provide their employees with the feedback that they need to get better is it's too uncomfortable for the manager. The conversation is too uncomfortable for me to go tell you what you need to hear to get better, right? And for me, that's one of the most selfish decisions you could make as a leader. So as a leadership team, and Chris is one of the best at this, we've challenged ourselves to not fall into that trap and to give each other feedback in the right way, right? So here's where we see you contributing, here's where you bring a lot of value, and instead of defaulting to, and this is where you're really bad, and here's where I think you could do even more, right? So the subtleties of that make a big difference.
Chris Collins, if you're still watching, this is a subtle reminder to send James and your friend David Nour something nice from Ireland. This is a coaching moment. Let's talk about this pandemic accelerating some key trends. James, there's a lot of talk about going back. And Karen and I had a really interesting conversation. And we agree. I don't think there's anything about, going back to. I think we're all going to move forward. How's Schneider thinking about moving forward with hybrid work, with what will the post-pandemic work environment look like? And then I'm going to come ask John the same question. Talk about moving forward in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah, I've tried to purposefully extract that from my language. And it's just I'm becoming more and more aware every time I say that it's not going to lead to a better place, when we start thinking about going back. And because the speed of transformation is just so different today than it was. I mean, when we went through the ATM thing, it took us 18 years to get to 50 million users for ATM, right? And as we went through COVID, the Indian government released an app that went to 50 million in 13 days, right? So transformation is happening. Our job is to help the customers understand that not all of these transformations require major investments. Most, if not all of these transformations deliver an unbelievable return on investment, but it takes a step. It takes a first step, which gets into the whole trusted advisor relationship that we cherish with our customers. I think in terms of the work is already being redefined, and I think it'll continue to be redefined. I think this notion of everyone needing to be in the same place face to face is changed, and we'll never go back to where we were on that front. And I think we'll be better because of it. I think the employee value proposition has shifted dramatically because of the experience that people had as they went through COVID, because they learned that this can be effective. I still want to get face to face for some collaboration. I miss that, but this work-life balance that I'm able to get through this, I don't miss my commute. All of that stuff brings value. So I think finding the right balance point is what we're still trying to navigate through. I mentioned to you before we started, we have a construction project going on here at the headquarters building in Carrollton, Texas, right outside of Dallas. And the investment that we're making here is to reconfigure this space to better reflect the now and to be ready for the next. Right, so this office that I'm in today will not exist when we're through with construction. We won't have physical offices. It'll be open space with reserved rooms that you can go to, get on your app and schedule. You can see how many people are scheduled to be in the building tomorrow. All those types of things to empower you to make better decisions.
John, what do you say to that leader that perhaps with that old school mindset of, yeah, this grand experiment of everybody working from home was great, but in the post-pandemic, I need you to come back into an office. What's the mindset of that leader, and are they going to remain relevant?
I think there have to be. I think that there is going to be an eventual return to an in-office environment, right? And I think if you think about the technicians, one of the things that they don't like is isolation, and so collaboration is a big component of what they like. So if you can treat it as an opportunity for renewed collaboration, an opportunity for learning, for listening, for opportunities to improve the business, involvement in transformation, I think there's nothing but benefit that can be had from that. I want to reflect on James's comment on looking forward instead of backwards, and I have to look backwards in order to look forward. And I remember there was a keynote delivered at the Chief Service Officers Summit. It was an event that was hosted by the Aberdeen Group many years ago. And we had a keynote speaker, Michael Tracy. He wrote the book Good to Great, and he talked about, he got up on stage and there was a room full of service leaders, and he said, all of your jobs will be eliminated in the future. Sorry to tell you, because products are going to be designed so sophisticated. The whole theory of design for serviceability, the need for service is just going to be gone. And it didn't go over so nicely in the crowd, but in many cases, that is an issue that needs to be considered by leadership, because as we're thinking about technology innovation, upskilling, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, one of the biggest inhibitors to creating an environment of information enablement is that they fear for their job security, that they feel like this technology is going to displace them. So the more that leaders can say, look, this is collaboration, this is an opportunity to supplement you, not replace you, I think there's a great opportunity for to go forward in a positive way.
John, I had a technician warn me about that in like 1983 when Carrier introduced this new technology piece of equipment, that all our jobs were going to be eliminated. And you know, there's a bit of fear mongering that kicks in with that.
Totally.
I think the reality is it's going to be different, and it'll continue to be different as we continue to evolve. Even, you know, we talk about flexibility, and I mentioned the pavilion at Penn Medicine and this beacon of hope. Part of their design was to create a building that could flex. You know, even with the now between a spike in intensive care needs and then the normal patient room needs, they created a design that allows them to flex even in the near term with an infrastructure that allows them to flex longer term and be future proof. And I think we have to think about buildings and environments that way, which is why we're making the investment here.
John, I want to build on the advisory board insight that the top metric you mentioned in 2020 was this idea of business continuity, right? With the uncertainty, none of us still was trying to figure out what the other side of this looks like. But interestingly enough, the priority for 21 shifted to growth. Talk about that for a second and what that means, and what does that really look like?
Yeah, I borrow your phrase, Nour, which is that you can't cut your way to growth, and I think that's coming true as we look at the data from the service leaders agenda. And actually, we go back 4 years. It's always CX initiatives and cost, and it's been 1-2 every single year. They flip flopped every year, with revenue third, and this year revenue is tied with CX initiatives. So, you know, we've been talking about smarter services for, I don't even know how long, James, maybe 10 or 11 years now, right? And it's this harmonious balance between those three opposing forces. One doesn't have to suffer when the other is accelerating and improving, right? That you can be cost effective, you can be profitable, and you can have happy customers. So it just, I think that's still true, right? I think that notion of finding that harmonious balance between those three forces can happen. It's telling, though, when you look at service revenue climbing the ladder this year. I think it has everything to do with COVID, right? COVID last year was a year of business continuity, right? In many cases, hold on for dear life. And now a lot of investments are happening to accelerate digital transformation, to innovate around revenue models. So SLA agreements are changing. The introduction of new services, making access to information, customer portals, IoT data, more SME and services that are geared towards advisory and consulting are starting to become more and more prevalent. Yep. And so there is a turn happening. There's a shift happening to revenue. So I'm excited about it because I think 2021 can be a year of growth, and that's I think a lot of companies need it.
That's exciting, James. In our conversation, I wrote down one of the interesting vernacular used was laying down digital asphalt. Can you talk about where some of the growth opportunities for you and your team could come from? I know you also have embarked on a big digital transformation and the handoff between what was Chris's team and Karen's, and talk a little about the growth opportunities at your place.
Yeah, John teased at some of this with the comments around data and IoT. So there's 30 billion connected devices out there today, and the expectation is that that'll go to 75 billion by 2025, so 4 years from now. So that's the pace of change. And all of those devices inside a building specifically are creating data, and they're trying to share that data with us. But just data that's unorganized is noise. You can't do anything with it. So where we see the growth opportunity is harnessing that data and turning it into actionable information that can reframe the way that the work is done. So, for example, you'll have some facilities where you have heating valves that have been leaking for 10 years that nobody knew about. And as a result, the cooling system has to work twice as hard, which results in this 30% waste that we see in buildings across the space, right? So that's savings that can be captured. By harnessing the data that the building is already trying to share with us, we could turn that into action to go find that leaking valve, to replace it or fix it or repair it, to stop that waste. And those savings can be harnessed to drive other things that are more core to the mission of the hospital or the university or the commercial office building. So part of what our role is when we talk about bringing a building into the future is laying in analytics and AI over the top of anybody's system, right? But dashboards that allow the folks that are operating the facility to be better equipped to make better decisions to create a better experience for the occupants.
Are you
That's
finding
huge growth opportunity?
Are you finding your team to be doing more new kind of building installs, or are you retrofitting the stock that's been around since the 80s?
Yeah, the built space is a big growth opportunity for us. Even just in our own installed base is a huge opportunity. But on the new construction space, what we're seeing from the developers was shifting before COVID and has dramatically shifted since. So why I say that is if you look at like New York City, for example, the occupancy rates are down 40-50% from where they were pre-pandemic. Lease rates are down. The lease prices have dropped back down to 2018 levels. So the competition for the available tenants has gone way up. So how are you going to attract tenants to your building? You have to create a differentiated experience, right? And how do you do that? What's important to the people who are making decisions? So empowerment, they want their own control. They want transparency. They want to know that the building is safe and clean and is being well kept, that the air quality is appropriate for them to re-enter the building. The technology has been here for a long time to do this. I believe it's more of a leadership challenge than a technology challenge, and I think more so today. I heard a definition yesterday that was shared with me from Tom Smith, who is the author of the Oz Principle. And what Tom, I wrote this down. He called leadership the ability to facilitate movement in the needed direction. That's basic. Here's the punchline. And have people feel good about it, right? Have people feel good about it, which gets back to the messaging and the need to connect to the front line. To amplify this, I talked about Karen and her role with us. Last year, she delivered triple-digit growth in digital connections to our customers, right? Triple-digit growth in digital connections. Why? Well, she was committed, she was passionate, she took the time, as the question suggested, to go out to the front line and understand. We took time to go to our customers and understand, and we recognized that this pandemic was an accelerator and an opportunity for us to prove to our customers that digital first really works. And it's been a game changer for all of us.
And for our audience, she's also very active in the Service Council, which might be a really good glimpse into her wisdom. Yeah. Joking aside, what a great opportunity. James, talk about that a second. You've been involved with, let's pretend John Carroll is not here for a second. You've been involved with Service Council for some time, and you shared a story of how invaluable some of that collaboration with other peers become. Talk about that a second.
Yeah, no, I mentioned in the podcast the trip I made out to one of the board members to his company and to kind of unpack their value prop and some of the things that they're seeing in terms of change. And some of it was a bit of a myth-busting exercise for me, because he had proven out that these myths that I had held on to for years were just not relevant anymore. And it was a long drive back to Dallas, right, for me to digest this, and it changed the way I look at things. But we've got a robust board. I was listening to your podcast with Sonia, and the things that she's doing in terms of culture with Southwest and her personal reflections from a leadership standpoint. There's some really strong nuggets in there that make you reflect on your own approach to things and being genuine and authentic, especially in times like this. And she used the word empathetic, which I think now more than ever is critical. So the collaboration has been fantastic. I found this organization to be more strategic than many other organizations, peer groups that I've been associated with in the space. Those other groups are great for some of the tactical things and how things are getting applied. But the conversations we have here are thought-provoking. We were listening on the board meeting the other day about the application of Help Lightning, at the train company. So they're proving out that this technology that I was introduced to 7 years ago, right, that came out of the University of Birmingham, Alabama, for a medical application, can be applied into our space and improve the frontline experience for our workers. So it's great. It's an enriching experience.
Where do you believe those long-held myths that you had come from?
I had somebody tell me a long time ago, we were talking about the aging workforce and the difficulty to drive transformation. And he commented to me that it's not the gray hairs that worry me, it's the gray brain. And okay, what do you mean by that? And it's old ways of thinking that just are less relevant today than they were before. So this whole notion of everybody has to be in the office. Our people want to come back, right? They want to get collaborative, but they don't want it to be every day, every hour, right? It's going to be on their terms. So I think as leaders, one of the challenges that all of us have, regardless of where we are in our career, is to make sure that we're doing the right things to stay relevant and to stay closely tuned to those listening posts so that we can understand the trends that are moving all around us. The thing that I'm clear on today is that the things that I used to see as being emerging trends are already here. So that's a recognition that as soon as I say, wow, that's emerging, stop, it's already here. And the pace of change is just dramatically different today than ever before. And it'll be dramatically different for the leaders that are just starting their careers today.
I captured distinctly: crazy, dangerous, obvious.
Yeah.
Right? So, John, you and I have talked about this. I don't know of an organization or an industry that doesn't need fresh thinking, fresh perspective, and differing lenses to challenge some of those assumptions. Was that your vision for the Service Council, and has it turned out exactly as you had hoped?
It really has. Honestly, I'm living the dream every day. I love what I do, and I love the community that we support. We were launched as a LinkedIn business group, believe it or not. That was the test and the hypothesis that I had, that a community and information platform was needed for service executives like James and others. And the whole belief that we had was that uncommon industries share common pains and pressures, right? So how can we cross-pollinate ideas and bring the audience together in an environment where they can learn from one another, and we can spirit the discussion with research and data? And I'll never forget it. I literally grew the community one by one. I said, let's go high. Let's get people like James, P&L owners that really are strategic thought leaders, and foundation the audience the right way. And it was Larry Wash, actually. I think he might have been a colleague of yours, James.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Larry. Yeah.
Yeah, Larry was the president of global services for Ingersoll Rand at one point, and then Kone Elevator Corporation. And we have board support from both of those organizations still. But Larry was trying to launch a business in Latam, and he knew that another member organization in the healthcare space had done it effectively. And he said, hey, John, can you facilitate an introduction to this gentleman? And I said, there it is. And so ever since, we've been doing it, and I love what we do every day. It's been fun.
And you put on a major event, the Service Symposium in the fall. I know, it was in person in 19. You went virtual like many events this past year. You're actually getting back together again this September in Chicago?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And last year when we converted to digital, we saw 3x the audience. So that was really nice to see. But yeah, we're coming back to Chicago. We'll be creating a hybrid experience. We know that some folks will have travel restrictions. So we will have some hybrid opportunity to collaborate digitally, which is what we do day in and day out anyways. But we will be in person in Chicago September 13th through the 15th, Monday through Wednesday. And we'll be at the Lowe's right in downtown Chicago, which is just a beautiful property.
James, are you seeing the same pent-up demand? I believe as human beings, we're tactile, right? And I don't know about you. I think we've all gotten some bit of cabin fever. And are you seeing that same kind of pent-up demand or need to kind of reconnect and re-engage and get back together as a team within the organization?
No, it's exponential. And we talk about it all the time. We can't wait. Karen hasn't been face-to-face with most of the team. She started April of last year. And so she's been driving this transformation into the role in this environment, which is very different than any of us went through. And yeah, it's my team. My team is a very close team, and I'm fortunate in they do a really good job looking out for each other and checking each other and challenging each other equally. But the dynamic that challenge takes on when you're face to face is more fun and different than digitally. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. I know our customers are working to get facilities ready to reopen and in some cases reimagine what the facilities look like on the other side of this.
It dawned on me, almost every previous Zoom visit you and I've had, you've got this screen behind you, I think with the Schneider kind of core values.
Yeah.
Talk a little about those and why that's so important to you.
Yeah, I get asked a lot about the success we had last year through the pandemic. Why? And I do believe that when you go through anything that's as stressful as that, who you are is going to emerge. And if you want to test your culture, you put it through that kind of a stress test. And I'm very proud of where we landed on things like embrace different. Our core value around inclusion and diversity, and inside of that, the comment around calling out bias wherever we see it. And I reflect back on the incidents that happened following the killing of George Floyd and how we responded as an organization. I'm getting chills. As an organization, it makes you really proud. So it's a touchstone for me. I use that phrase a lot. It's something that I keep front and center. And as a team, we check ourselves on it. We did an after action review a few months ago just to see how did we do on customer first? How did we do on dare to disrupt? And that was one that we exposed as, we can do a better job creating safer places for people to have controlled explosions in a laboratory in one of our locations, right? So it keeps us grounded, and it creates a promise that it's up to us to fulfill. And I think it's part of what attracts talent to this organization.
Can you share what those values are?
Yeah, sure. Dare to disrupt is really about the notion that we're always in beta, right? So it gets to this whole thing around innovation and ingenuity. Customer first, inside the customer first value statement is a sentence that says, we celebrate our frontline salespeople because we recognize that they're the face of Schneider Electric to our customers, right? We anticipate our customers' needs. And so easy test points for us as we went through the pandemic. Were we really celebrating our salespeople, right? Did we anticipate our customer needs? Act like owners is another one that I think we excelled on. All in together is the opening statement on that. And I think, it's part, when I talk about the things that we're proud of as an organization, that one there in particular stood out for us because as we went through this, we never lost focus on the things that were important. And Justin Lavoie runs our partner channel. I'll give you a great example. So when we recognized the situation we were in, Justin got his entire sales team together. And he said, I want you to do something today. I want you to reach out and I want you to call your customers and see how they're doing. Don't talk about business. Don't talk about their facility. Just check in on them and see how they're doing and if there's anything you can do to personally help them. And it just, it was a reflex. So it just communicates, the culture of the organization. We focus on learning. So learn every day is a big one for us as well. So we're always in beta. We recognize that individually there's a better version of ourselves that we can develop. So
love that.
Help?
Absolutely. So John, I'm going to put you on the spot. One of probably many, but one lasting nugget you've picked up from James over the years.
Oh my gosh. It's always looking forward. James is one of the most critical and prognostic thinkers that I've ever met. He is the guy that is always looking forward, and he's a true visionary. And the other thing about him is that he's always been so humanity driven, where he's always willing to jump in and help another member. So just like he gleaned information by visiting that other member organization, one of the board members, he's just as likely to welcome anyone in and help them as well, whether it's career development, organizational development. He's just a very willing learner, but also a giver in that sense, educator. So
nice.
Kind words.
So James, again, one of the notes I highlighted in our conversation, the podcast, and for our audience, if you haven't had a chance, servicecouncil.com/podcasts is a great place to catch my interview with James this morning. You said, not let the building change you.
Yeah.
Talk about where that came from and why it resonated.
Yeah, my first big corporate job, I had to move to the headquarters building with another organization. And the VP who ran the division for the US pulled me in and gave me some coaching about how to be successful in that kind of an environment. It was very different. And he said to not let the building change you. And he shared with me some examples of how that environment had changed people. And over the years, I've witnessed it, and I've caught myself in it as well. He also made a comment that has always stuck with me. He said, you're a field guy. Don't ever lose that. And I think it's important to not lose touch with where you came from and the obligation that you have to pay it forward, both by trying to be a better example for people, but also reaching back and creating opportunities for folks that are trying to better themselves in their careers, similar to what Tom did for me when he gave me that opportunity and gave me the coaching along the way. But I think this notion of being true to yourself is very important. And for people who are making decisions around organizations that they attach themselves to, ensuring that the core values of that organization in action line up with their own personal core values is critical. It's one of the most important decisions that you can make as a leader or as an individual.
John Carroll, final question. What are you most looking forward to on the other side of this pandemic? Because I don't know about you, I've got my vaccine card ready and excited about getting back out there. What are you most looking forward to?
I'll tell you what, the kids going back to school is one of the biggest things that I have been looking forward to.
Please.
I have 4 kiddos at home, and they're 5 to 12, and they are monkeys. My goodness. So I think that's goodness. But also, I'm a big golfer, so I'm looking forward to hitting the courses with sheer aggression this coming season. So
nice, James. I'm going to ask you the same question. One thing you're most looking forward to on the other side of this pandemic?
I just want a hug, man. I mean, there's people in my family I haven't seen in a long time, and I want to get back up to New York and visit and spend some time with family members. And I also want to get over to Ireland, not just to see Chris, but to see some family members over there as well. So looking forward to the smell of jet fuel in the morning.
If he invites you and not John Carroll and me, I'm going to be upset. I'm going to be just a little upset.
Nour, earlier in the conversation, you said send a gift home to your friend Nour and James. You didn't offer the only Irish guy in the room here.
That's true. Well, he's going to invite you to come play golf with him, right? So for our audience, you've been listening to James Mylett, senior executive running the U.S. digital building for Schneider Electric, as Massa was kind enough to jump in and others. What a great conversation. And John Carroll, CEO of Service Council. Don't forget, each month we host a different field service, customer experience, field service and customer support leaders to really talk about the evolution in the space. We do that with a podcast, and then we host them on these LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube live sessions. So I hope you'll come back and join us. Servicecouncil.com is the best place to learn about the latest updates. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nour. Thanks, James.